Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. So I know gardeners who get perfectly robust gardens while using deep tillage with a mechanical tiller, and they're sometimes like, okay, why would I not do this? And I think that's a totally reasonable question. So let's do it. First, I want to be clear that I do not judge anyone for how they grow food. That is not the purpose of this video or this channel. In fact, I think people who use tillage often assume no-till folks are like hopelessly dogmatic about tillage versus no tillage. And that's just not really the case for the vast majority of us. One, I know great growers who still use tillage and have for a long time because they have developed systems around some of the things I'm going to discuss in this video. Also, depending on your context and the condition of your soil, tilling the soil before establishing a no-till garden, especially where compaction is present, is a common recommendation from us because it can be a very effective way to start a garden, as we've discussed in many other videos. Quote-unquote never till is not always the right approach because, like I always say, if there's nothing there to protect in terms of soil organic matter and soil life, which in compacted soils is often very much the case, then put something there worth protecting and then protect it. A lot of folks who practice no-till will also sometimes or even regularly work the top 2 or 3 inches of the soil surface, keeping the rhizosphere, the root zone where the vast majority of soil life resides, intact, but creating a useful tilth for seeding or employing a tool like the paper pot transplanter or whatever. Indeed, our main hope with this channel and things like the Living Soil Handbook, which, when you get it from no-tillgrowers.com, helps to support this work, is to simply give you some other tools to work with that will reduce the need for heavy tillage and hopefully eliminate some of the significant challenges that come along with managing a garden with regular tillage. Apologies for this wildly big windup for this video, but what challenges are those specifically? So glad you asked. The first challenge with regular tillage is weeds. If you think tillage creates a fluffy planting or seeding surface, whoo buddy, you should hear how excited weed seeds get about it. Tillage is ideal for weeds because 1, it brings up dormant weed seeds from deep in the soil, so even if you do a good job of cultivating, you effectively start that process over every time you till. 2, it establishes a very low competition environment in which weeds can grow. And 3, weeds are annual plants and considered recovery species, so it is effectively their job to repair damaged soil. And by job, I just mean that somewhere in their evolution, a bunch of annual species discovered a niche, growing quickly and spreading their progeny where a pack of boars roamed, for instance, or a tree fell, or a bone plow flipped some sod, or whatever event happened to expose some soil. Tillage is basically what they trained for millennia. So a giant tilled garden is the ultimate go time for recovery species, like most weeds. Tilling also breaks up rhizomatous weeds like Bermuda grass. Bermuda? Is that how you say it? Like Bermuda grass or Johnson grass or bindweed, and effectively replants them, which is nice. Are all weeds bad? No. I mean, from the soil's perspective, all weeds are fantastic. A+. Something to grow rapidly and replenish and cover the soil is basically all the soil ever wants. I must be in quite the mood to anthropomorphize today. But from a farmer's perspective, the vast majority of weeds are going to cause problems depending on the crops you grow and what time of year. For instance, weeds dramatically slow down harvest, and spiny weeds can make that event quite miserable. Weeds can ruin airflow, which can lead to diseases. They can compete for nutrients and water, and then they themselves can replant quite rapidly. Tilling, especially when not coupled with mulches, is almost always going to lead to flushes of weeds. Kitty cat, I know you're there. I'll get to you. In fact, even those who just work the top 2 inches of the soil will deal with more weed pressure than those who do not. More disturbance is almost always going to equal more weeds. Of course, there are ways to manage weeds, like regular well-timed cultivations, but that requires time and/or equipment. And when it rains for a week straight and the entire garden explodes in weeds in July, when you're already slammed and busy, that can be tough to deal with. So when we present different options for no or low tillage, which there are videos all over this channel about all of that stuff, we are ultimately presenting options for reducing your labor, especially in the peak of the season, but also potentially increasing your yields and protecting your crops. And again, spiny weeds are the worst. They just are. Tilling is also brutal to the soil ecology. I've discussed this in other videos, but a big portion of what makes soil healthy are the soil aggregates created by soil microbes wrapping up microscopic chunks of carbon inside of soil particles with various sticky enzymes that they create. We call these soil aggregates, and they help not only trap carbon for a small amount of time in the soil, but they help with water retention and movement, provide food and food storage and housing for microbes. on top of, I don't know, a million other things. But when we till, we effectively smash those aggregates and release that locked up carbon while whipping a bunch of oxygen into the soil. Oxygen-loving bacteria then consume the newly released food stores, the carbon, and release it in the form of carbon dioxide, similar to how we release carbon dioxide when we eat a sandwich, or anything we eat. It doesn't have to be a sandwich. Of course, this release of carbon dioxide is going on all the time in healthy soil. It should be. It's a good measure of healthy soil is the amount of carbon dioxide that comes out of it. But the difference is that there are plants to recapture the carbon dioxide and put it back into the soil, right, in the carbon cycle. But obviously, when you till, there is no plant there to just go ahead and recapture that carbon, so it just escapes into the atmosphere. So although you can get a burst of nitrogen, which is reflected in plant growth, there are diminishing returns there. And all that hard work that your plants and microbes did fixing that carbon into the soil, tillage undoes that rapidly. This is why it's important to avoid tilling that area around the rhizosphere, about 4 to 8 inches down. That is where a large percentage of these aggregates and that soil life reside. Okay, so continuing down our winding road through reasons not to till, those aggregates also help keep the soil in place. Tillage is a huge issue when it comes to soil erosion from elements like wind, rain, getting hauled to the dump on plastic, or getting washed down the drain when you're cleaning vegetables. All those things erode soil. Can soil still erode in no and low till systems? Well, mostly no, but I don't want to disregard the possibility because it depends on the system and the climate. For instance, if you are using something like a tilther to work the top 2 or so inches of the soil, and then you have a heavy rainfall, you may notice some unfortunate erosion on the soil surface. Though you will also see that the area around the rhizosphere stayed mostly intact, hopefully. Obviously, you don't want to lose any soil ever, but the more you can reduce the potential for heavy soil loss, the better, especially for things like earthworms. In fact, let's go down that hole for a second. Things like worms and other beneficial macro creatures not only get beat to death and chopped up, sorry, that's literally what's happening in a tillage event, but their infrastructure gets demolished as well. Tillage is to the soil what it would be to a city. In order for citizens to return, if you ran a giant tiller through a city, which please don't do that. I don't know where you'd get one, but if you have one, I wouldn't use it on a city. You'd have to rebuild the infrastructure like electricity and water before you could really start building new structures. Same sort of idea applies to the soil. Sure, you can load a bunch of plants into tilled soil, a bunch of structures, so to speak, but their support is going to be limited because the infrastructure needs some time to be repaired properly to support them. Not that analogies are real life, but this lack of proverbial established infrastructure means that plants and the soil don't have access to all the tools required to fully sustain themselves, and that's one reason you may run into more pest and disease issues on your plants in tilled systems. I think of no-till systems as a way to fully allow that infrastructure to be built and stay built before you put in those buildings, plants. But that could also be a reason that no-till systems can take a year or more to really get going. Rebuilding infrastructure after a tiller came through your city can take time, one would assume. Another thing that I generally like about no-till systems versus tillage systems is how much cooler the soil can be around the mulch and living plants. In fact, some growers use tillage primarily because it warms the soil, which can come in handy in the spring. But in the summer, no-till plots tend to keep a nice even temperature, whereas tillage can lead to large and intense temperature fluctuations. Of course, this depends on the type of no-till system you are using. Compost mulch can obviously get pretty hot, whereas lightly colored mulches keep the soil fairly cool. Instead of tillage in the spring, I like those compost mulches, and sometimes even using a tarp to help get the soil up to a good plantable temperature. Then in the summer, I like to rely more on cover crop residue or other lightly colored carbonaceous mulches to keep the soil cool. And of course, the living pathways chip in a bit on the coolness. I mean, go stand in a lawn and then in a tilled field on a hot day, and you can truly feel the difference. That's definitely something to consider because when you till, you have to cultivate. And when you cultivate, it will likely be hot, not just on you, but on the soil. But it is also on you. It gets very hot. Obviously, if you are going to till, get the soil filled rapidly in plants and or mulch, both of which have a cooling effect on the soil and air around them. Indeed, if you're tired of hotter and hotter summers, tillage is never really going to help. More often than not, it just kind of adds to the problem. Okay, let's do some quick hitters so I can get to harvesting this morning. First, one huge practical issue I have with tillage is that the soil has to be relatively dry to work it. So basically, there are springs and even summers here in Kentucky at least, where you literally can't get into your gardens before late April. In many no-till systems, by comparison, you can be in the field planting while it's pouring if you want, or just in the middle of winter. I learned how to farm on a tillage farm, and where we used to start our garden prep in March or April if we got a dry, warm spell, we can now start whenever we want because we don't have to work the soil. It's one of the huge benefits of no-till. Another thing about tillage in our rainy climate is soil being splashed onto plants from heavy rain can cause foliar diseases. It can also just be a pain in the washback shed, but foliar diseases. Now, if mulch is down, that's not going to be as big of an issue, things like foliar diseases. Though, of course, mulches can harbor fungal diseases, so harbor fungal diseases, so it's not a perfect comparison. For a no-till system, plant roots are typically left in the soil and allowed to slowly decompose, which limits nitrogen tie-up. But for tillage systems, the roots are smashed and immediately consumed, which can tie up nitrogen and slow the grower's ability to replant quickly, which means that during bed turnover, that is going from one crop to another, the grower has to wait a couple weeks to allow for that decomposition after a tillage event, unless they just rip out all the plants and then go that way. But then you lose a bunch of carbon. It's kind of a lose-lose. In terms of planting, whether tillage is faster or slower than no-tillage is highly dependent on which no-till system we are talking about and what the crop is. For instance, you're going to be able to plant 1,000 lettuce plants by hand into tilled soil faster than soil that's covered with straw, for instance. But do you make up for that planting time by not having to cultivate that soil? Maybe. Is tillage more energy dependent? Yes, maybe. But also that depends on where your mulches came from and how they were produced. Objectively, some mulches come from hay fields, and hay is extremely energy intensive, so maybe not. Again, there is no point in being dogmatic about any of these things. Instead, be considerate of your soil ecology, your soil erosion, your business and personal goals. Like, for instance, I don't want to spend all of my time cultivating in the heat, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, totally unrelated to this video, our buddy Dan Brisebois, host of the Seed Farmer podcast, just wrote a new book, and it is on pre-order now at notillgrowers.com, and it is amazing. I read it. I really love Dan's approach because it's all about how to incorporate seed production into the market garden, which I love. More on that soon, but let me know your thoughts on tillage or no tillage or any terms you like to use. Doesn't matter to me. Why you would or wouldn't do one or the other in the comments section. What did I miss or get wrong? If you would like to learn more about the living soil and no-till systems I highly recommend, then check out the Living Soil Handbook, which you can also get from notillgrowers.com. It is also currently available in French and soon Italian and German, which is wild. Yeah. You can't get the translated versions from us at No-Till Growers. You have to buy those in the countries that speak those respective languages. Ça marche? Anyways, like this video if you like this video. If you're not subscribed to this channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you are subscribed, you're awesome. I'm getting to you. Support our work at patreon.com/no-till-growers or just hit that super thanks button. That works too. Otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you later. Bye. There she is. Are you happy with yourself, kitty?